Namaskar, this is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. We begin tonight with the story of Paytm. Once synonymous with digital payments in India, the bank is in deep trouble. Their founder Vijay Shekhar Sharma has had to resign from the board. But will it be enough to pacify the regulators in India? And what next for Paytm? We'll discuss all of that. Meanwhile, sovereign AI remains in focus. Chip maker Nvidia wants to collaborate with India to develop it. What does that mean? And why is it significant? In Gaza, hopes of a ceasefire as Israel clashes with Lebanon intensify. In Ukraine, French President Emmanuel Macron says he cannot rule out putting soldiers on the ground. In Pakistan, charges of water terrorism after India builds a dam on the Ravi River. At the World Trade Organization, an old fault line emerges, with India once again pitted against the West. Also a report on how heart diseases are being linked to the Wuhan virus. Can money buy friendship? Apparently it can in China. And a look at India's Gaganyaan mission as Prime Minister Modi reveals the crew. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Nigerian army denies reports of a coup plot. Reports claim that the presidential guard tasked with the president's protection is on alert. Also alleged the Nigerian president has held emergency meetings. Currently, the West African country is battling a severe economic crisis. In India, the ruling BJP is gearing up for the general election. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman and External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar will contest. The names of their constituencies haven't been revealed as yet, but speculation is rife that both could contest from Karnataka. Population crisis deepens in Japan. In 2023, births in the country fell to a record low. This marks the 8th consecutive year of decline. Tokyo says it will take quote-unquote unprecedented steps to reverse the declining birth rate. The European Union criminalizes the most serious cases of ecosystem destruction. It is the first international body to do so. Ecosystem destruction includes habitat loss and illegal logging. Countries will have 2 years to make it a national law. And New Zealand is set to scrap its anti-smoking law. Just last year, this first of its kind legislation was brought in. The law banned the sale of tobacco to anyone born after 1st January 2009. It was set to come into effect from July this year. Newspapers can tell fascinating stories. And I don't mean just the articles, I mean the front page. Let's show you the front page of the Times of India on February 19th. A full-sized Paytm ad. The company is currently on the regulator's radar, so Paytm wanted to assure its users. Now look at today's front page. Founder Vijay Sharma quits Paytm Bank board. How about that? Last week he was reassuring his users. This week, he himself is out. So tonight, we're looking at some important questions here. What changed between then and now? Why did Vijay Shekhar Sharma quit? And what next for Paytm? First, some context. Paytm Payments Bank is a subsidiary of Paytm. It was founded in 2017. Vijay Shekhar Sharma, the Paytm CEO, owns 51% stake in it, more than half. The rest is with the parent company. Recently, the Reserve Bank of India, that is India's central bank, pulled up this company. Why? For a number of reasons. Customers were not being verified properly, balances were not being maintained, and there was no separation of operations, meaning the payments bank was too close to Paytm. So the RBI put its foot down. It asked Paytm to stop all banking activities by the 15th of March. No new deposits, no credit transactions, and no new accounts. Which brings us to the latest news. Vijay Shekhar Sharma has quit the Paytm Payments Bank board. Some new faces have been brought in, 2 former bankers and 2 former IAS officers, administrative service officers. The idea here is to placate the Reserve Bank of India to show them that progress is being made. Earlier, Vijay Sharma was wearing too many hats. Paytm CEO, Paytm's largest shareholder, also chairman of Paytm Payments Bank. By resigning, he's telling the Reserve Bank of India, look, we have separation now. Paytm and the bank can be separate. But will the RBI buy it? Well, the market is confused. When the news came in, Paytm shares shot up. At 9:15 a.m., it was trading at 419 rupees. By 9:25, it almost reached 450 rupees. That's a 7% surge in 10 minutes. But since then, there has been a correction. Paytm shares have lost those early gains, so the investors do not really know what to make of it. On paper, this could be a step in the right direction, but the worry is that it won't be enough. So what happens next? Well, that depends on the RBI. We don't know if the Reserve Bank will be satisfied with this one change. They haven't said anything yet, but if they're not satisfied, more changes may have to be made. Maybe to the ownership structure, or internal governance, or the leadership. Whatever it is, it has to be big. It must convince the Reserve Bank that Paytm and the Paytm Bank are now separate, and that the bank is now an independent entity. And who can make that change? Vijay Shekhar Sharma himself. His corporate rise is a story of grit and determination. Born in Aligarh to school teachers, very basic primary education, but a drive to succeed. He attended college at the DTU, the Delhi Technology University. Later, he rode the dot-com wave. He founded a couple of startups and sold them for good money. He created Paytm in the year 2010. But at first, the company struggled because Indians were not quite familiar with digital money. Cash was still king. All that changed in 2016. The Indian government demonetized higher denomination notes. Demonetization. The main goal was to fight black money, but it made digital money popular in India. Suddenly, everyone was on Paytm. You could find their QR codes at local shops. Bill payments went online. Indians were not transferring money anymore. They were Paytming it. All of this added to Vijay Shekhar Sharma's personal growth. He featured in the Forbes 2022 list. His net worth was $1.2 billion, but today he's in a lot of trouble. And you can't say it's a surprise. The RBI has pulled up the Paytm Payments Bank before, even fined them for violations, yet Sharma did not change things. So this RBI deadline is the culmination of many warnings and fines, which is why one board rejig may not be enough. And when banks go down, it's a very scary affair because a lot of money is at stake. A lot of lives and livelihoods are at stake. If you're a Paytm customer, I know you have questions. So we'll end by answering some of them. Number one, will you lose your Paytm bank balance? No, you won't. The RBI order does not affect existing deposits. You can withdraw the money even after the 15th of March. But can you deposit more money? Again, no, you can't. No new deposits and no new credit transactions. That's what the RBI has said. What about your vehicle FASTags? The tag itself will keep working, but after the 15th of March, you cannot recharge or add money to it. So I guess closing it is the better option. Finally, what about transactions? Can you still scan and pay? Well, Paytm is the third largest UPI platform in India. They handle some 1.6 billion transactions every month. 1.6 billion. Only Google Pay and Phone Pay do better. So the company is in talks with other banks. Reports say at least 4 of them, Axis Bank, State Bank of India, HDFC Bank and Yes Bank. The idea here is to migrate Paytm Bank users to new UPI IDs. I know it all sounds very complicated, but that's the world of banking for you. You trust banks to do their due diligence. You also trust regulators to keep a watch. In this case, only one party did its job. The story of Paytm is a cautionary tale, but it shouldn't stop Indian techies from innovating. The next big breakthrough could come from AI, artificial intelligence, especially because India wants to invest in this space, and that's our next story tonight. We've been telling you about the chip maker called Nvidia. It has become synonymous with AI, and it is looking to collaborate with India. Yesterday, there was a meeting in New Delhi, and it is turning some heads. We have some pictures for you. That's India's IT minister. He met with Shankar Trivedi, a senior vice president at Nvidia. And what did they discuss? Sovereign artificial intelligence. It is the latest buzzword in tech circles, sovereign AI. And Nvidia's CEO started this conversation with a statement. Listen to this first.
Own your own national intelligence. You cannot allow that to be done by other people. And that is a realization.
Now, the world is taking it seriously. Is sovereign AI the next big thing? It could be, and India must try to take the lead in this game. Just think about the impact that UPI has had. UPI stands for Unified Payments Interface. It is the backbone of India's digital infrastructure. UPI democratized real-time payments. Earlier, if you had to transfer funds, you had to either depend on cash or issue a check or go to a bank to get it done. The process took more time and more effort. Now, UPI has effectively replaced all these archaic systems. As of last month, transactions worth 18 lakh crore were done through UPI in India. That's well over $200 billion. This is the impact of the technology of UPI. It has delivered a payment solution at a mass scale. Now imagine a similar technology to diagnose common diseases in hundreds of remote areas just by analyzing the symptoms. What if we had an app that could teach students, thousands of students, by adapting to their pace of learning? What if we could adjust the lessons and focus on each student's specific weaknesses and strengths? AI could potentially help us do all of this and more. It could deliver governance at a mass scale. Now, there are two ways to go about this. Either India could rely on the private sector, let the ecosystem led by tech giants like Google and Nvidia come up with solutions for India. Or India could make its own solution, like in the case of UPI. Which option is better suited for the country? We would say a mix of both. For a country as large and diverse as India, there cannot be a one-size-fits-all solution. If you want to reach the remote areas, if you want to reach the grassroots, you need both public and private participation. So India should welcome the interest from companies like Nvidia, merge their expertise with India's DNA of innovation, and ride the momentum generated by the AI breakthrough. Because it's certainly here to stay, especially when you look at the response from the markets. There is a frenzy. Indian investors are making big bets. They're buying shares of companies involved in the artificial intelligence space. And since we've been talking about Nvidia, let's stay with that example. This company makes chips, specialized chips, which power AI apps, generative AI apps like ChatGPT. Do you know how much Indian investors have poured into Nvidia? Around 1,700 crores. That's around $200 million. This money has flown mainly through mutual funds, the kind that invest in international equities. For the retail investors, there are few avenues to buy American stocks. Now, what if we had Indian companies building AI products here in the country? There are some who are trying to do this, but they have a lot of ground to cover. So will India's push for sovereign AI boost the prospects of these companies? We'll have to wait and see, but this is certainly a space worth tracking closely, and we're doing it for you. There's a glimmer of hope in Gaza. After months of fighting, there is talk of a ceasefire, a possible end to the war. And who's saying it? US President Joe Biden. He's also given a timeline for clinching this deal by the end of the weekend, he says. It's great news for Gaza and the region, a massive political development. But guess how Joe Biden announced it? While having some ice cream.
Well, I hope by the beginning of the weekend. The end of the weekend. At least my national security advisor tells me that we're close. We're close. It's not done yet. And my hope is by next Monday, we'll have a ceasefire.
So it's not done yet, but the talks in Paris have made progress. 4 parties are involved here: Israel, the United States, Qatar, and Egypt. Hamas does not attend directly. Instead, they relay messages via Qatar and Egypt. Last Friday, these parties met in Paris. They agreed on a draft ceasefire proposal. The complete details are not out yet, but most reports talk about 5 points. Number 1, the fighting will be paused for 40 days. This will include the holy month of Ramadan. Number 2, Israel will release 400 Palestinian prisoners. Number 3, Hamas will free 40 Israeli hostages, mostly women, children, and the elderly. So that's 1 hostage released for 10 Palestinian prisoners. And number 4, 500 aid trucks will be allowed to enter Gaza every day. So hospitals will be rebuilt, shelters will be restocked, and thousands of tents will be pitched for the displaced. And finally, number 5, Gazans will be allowed to return to the north. Just one exception, though. Men of military age cannot return. Reports say Israel's cabinet has already approved this proposal. The next step is for Hamas to agree. Some key meetings are being lined up in Doha and Cairo. We're hearing that Hamas will also attend these meetings. Maybe afterwards we'll have a decision. So that's the news from Gaza. Let's now shift to the West Bank. Their entire government has just stepped down. You see, the West Bank is ruled by the PA, the Palestinian Authority, PA. and its prime minister has announced his resignation. He says Palestine needs a new government based on consensus.
This decision comes based on the political, security, and economic developments that are related to the offensive on our people in Gaza and the unprecedented escalation in the West Bank and Jerusalem, and to what our people and Palestinian cause are facing, as well as our political system that had been aggressively attacked in an unprecedented manner.
The resignation has been passed on to Mahmoud Abbas. He is the Palestinian president. Abbas may ask him to serve on as a caretaker, but logistics aside, what's the message here? It's the message of reform. The PA has been under pressure to change. The last elections in the West Bank were held way back in 2006. Mahmoud Abbas himself was elected back in 2005. He's 88 years old now. Compare that to the people that he represents. The average Palestinian age is just 19. So the movement has changed from the 20th century. Young Palestinians have different ideas. The PA was under Western pressure to change. Hence the Prime Minister's resignation. But don't expect overnight reform. Chances are this will be a long and exhausting process. What about Israel? Do they have such long-term plans? Well, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has released his post-war plan. It talks about replacing Hamas with civilians. Basically, Netanyahu wants local representatives to rule Gaza. He also says Gaza must be demilitarized and de-radicalized. But these are very tough goals. Some might say worrying as well. Because according to this plan, Israel will have security control over Gaza and the West Bank. In the long term, that is not sustainable. Palestinians would never accept it. So Netanyahu's post-war plan is worrying. So are his attacks on Lebanon. Israel is now striking deep inside Lebanese territory. On Monday, they hit Baalbek. It's a stronghold of the Hezbollah group. It's also 75 kilometers from the border with Israel. Video showed plumes of smoke and Israeli fighter jets. Take a look at this. So far, Israeli attacks have been limited to the south, but this was eastern Lebanon, which means that Israel is escalating. The question is why? Maybe Netanyahu wants to keep the war alive to stay in office, or maybe these are preemptive strikes. Whatever the reason, it is worrying. It took almost 140 days to reach a tentative ceasefire deal in Gaza. The last thing we need is a war at the other front. From one war to another. Now let's look at the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Ukraine is on the back foot. It recently lost a key town called Avdiivka. Funding is drying up, American support is wavering, and Russia could begin another offensive this summer. The only backup that Kiev has left seems to be Europe. On Saturday, the second anniversary of Russia's invasion, some European leaders went to Kiev to show solidarity. Yesterday, a crisis meeting took place in Paris. Mostly European leaders got together to discuss the next step. And then French President Emmanuel Macron caused a stir.
There is no consensus today to officially, openly, and with endorsement send troops on the ground. But in terms of dynamics, nothing should be ruled out. We will do everything necessary to ensure that Russia cannot win this war.
This is Macron's personal view. He was clear about that. Not every European leader feels that way, but listen again.
I've never said France was not in favor of sending troops, but I've told you very clearly what France maintains as its position, which is a strategic ambiguity that I stand by. Nothing should be excluded to pursue our goals.
He said sending troops should not be ruled out. That is the president of France. He says he's maintaining strategic ambiguity by not being opposed to sending troops to Ukraine in an effort to defeat Russia. Think about that for a second. What he's suggesting is basically World War III. The last two world wars also began in Europe, setting off a chain of events that affected everyone in the world. So what Macron said should have set off alarm bells everywhere, but it hasn't had that effect yet, either because the world has forgotten or because they're not taking Macron seriously. After all, the war in Ukraine seems to have turned, with Russia making gains and America dithering about aid. Perhaps most nations expect Ukraine to surrender soon. But for a moment, let's say, that doesn't happen. Even if American aid dries up, Ukraine somehow remains defiant. What happens then? Macron believes Russia will take more territory, the Kremlin's forces will get closer to mainland Europe, and then Moscow may set its eyes on the next target. That's what the French president is implying.
I first note that there is a unity of views on this observation, that Russia continues the war, reiterates its objectives of territorial conquest, and has adopted a more aggressive attitude not only in Ukraine, but against all of us in general.
This is either posturing or paranoia, but both are dangerous. Macron also seems to be egging other European nations on, urging them to drop their objections.
Many people who say never today were the same people who said never tanks, never planes, never long-range missiles, never this 2 years ago. I remind you that 2 years ago, many people around this table were saying, we're going to offer sleeping bags and helmets. And today they're saying, we've got to work faster and harder to get the missiles and tanks.
Well, he does have a point there. The West had earlier set numerous red lines. No tanks, no fighter jets, no long-range missiles. All these objections have crumbled over time. Perhaps the objection to boots on the ground will go away too. Maybe someday Emmanuel Macron will turn around and say, I told you so. But for now, he sounds like the warmonger here, disguising plans for escalation by talking about strategic ambiguity. And if that isn't the case, if this is just Macron being Macron, trying to steal the limelight, then the comments we say are in poor taste. His desire to take a leadership role does not entitle him to raise tensions. Now let's talk about water, an essential resource that no one can live without. Water scarcity is the next big challenge. Many experts have predicted that future wars will be fought over water. India will have to guard against being drawn into such a conflict because it has an ongoing dispute with Pakistan. The dispute about dams and how they can influence water sharing between the two countries. Now recently, India built another dam. It is designed to divert the flow of the Ravi River away from Pakistan and towards the farmers of India. Critics in Pakistan are calling this, quote-unquote, water terrorism. But is that really the case? Our next report gets you the answers.
Pakistan's popular newspaper Dawn published this story yesterday. It's about a protest rally organized by civil society groups. Then there was this piece, with a headline that screams water terrorism. What's the trigger for the outrage? It's an Indian dam. It's called Shahpur Kandi. Indian authorities recently finished building it. The dam is part of a multi-purpose project. It includes 2 hydropower plants. But the project is making headlines for one thing: the diversion of the river Ravi's waters. Earlier, some of these waters fell into Pakistan and turned into waste. India's new dam will minimize this wastage. It will streamline the flow of the river's waters, make it available to farmers from Jammu and Kashmir and Punjab. They'll be able to harness the supply for irrigation. The project has been stalled for decades. It was first cleared way back in the 1990s. P.V. Narasimha Rao, the then Prime Minister, had laid its foundation. But disputes between local governments and the lack of funding slowed down its progress. In 2018, New Delhi made an intervention and the project was finally revived. Now, when it's finally complete, it's causing headaches in Pakistan. Pakistani groups are making demands. They want the natural flow of the Ravi revived. On top of that, they want Pakistan and India to review the Indus Water Treaty. This consequential pact was signed in 1960. It set the rules for water sharing between the neighbors. Are these demands justified? As far as India is concerned, New Delhi is unlikely to pay any attention. For starters, waters from the Ravi never belonged to Pakistan. The Indus Treaty gives India full rights to these waters. But that hasn't stopped Pakistan from raising objections. On several occasions, Islamabad has moved the World Bank, complaining about the construction of dams by India. Back in the 1960s, the World Bank had helped both sides and put together the Indus Treaty. But that doesn't give mediation rights to the World Bank. This is India's counter-argument as well. New Delhi argues that its dams are compliant with the Indus Treaty, but the challenges from Islamabad will keep coming. water is quickly becoming more scarce. Groundwater supplies are drying up, and the demand for fresh water and hydroelectricity are rising on both sides of the border. India and Pakistan have never fought a war over water. But if this dispute continues, it could easily turn into another conflict.
It's India versus the West again. This time at the World Trade Organization, some 164 trade ministers are attending the latest summit. It is being held in Abu Dhabi. A lot of issues and topics are on the agenda. But we're focusing on two of them tonight. One is climate change policies and two, food subsidies. Both issues pitch India against the West. Let's look at the first one. India's Commerce Secretary has flagged a major issue at the World Trade Organization. Listen to New Delhi's statement here. India expressed serious concerns regarding the increasing use of trade protectionist unilateral measures which are sought to be justified in the guise of environmental protection. I know that sounds a bit technical, but here's what it means. Some countries are using climate change to justify trade barriers. For example, the European Union. They've passed something called the carbon tax. It will come into effect by 2026. And what does it do? It imposes import duties on carbon-intensive goods, things like steel, cement, and aluminium. These have a very large carbon footprint. So the EU says these imports will have to pay a tax. How much? Between 20 and 35%. The idea is to produce such carbon-heavy goods inside the EU. This way, Brussels can enforce pollution norms. Just two problems though. A, studies say it will do little to cut emissions. And B, it will be unfair to Asian producers. Just consider India. We export a lot of metal to Europe. In fact, around 26% of the total ends up in the EU. 26%. But imagine this carbon tax being imposed. Indian metal will now be 20 to 35% more expensive. So what will European factories do? They will abandon Indian metals. Instead, they will use cheaper European ones. Do you see why that's a problem? In practice, this tax is a trade barrier. It is giving an unfair advantage to European producers. But tell that to the EU. They say it's all about protecting the earth, about incentivizing Asian producers to go green. The United States has a similar policy. They are handing out tax cuts for electric vehicles. How much? Up to $7,500, which is around 6.2 lakh rupees. Now, this tax cut has just one condition. The EV you buy must have been made in North America, basically the US or Canada. If it is made elsewhere, you won't get tax benefits. Again, this reeks of protectionism. It gives US-made cars an unfair advantage. But tell that to Joe Biden. He says he's building a better earth. Both India and China have criticized these policies. They want climate and trade to be separated, which brings us to the second flashpoint, and that is food security. WTO members cannot spend unlimited amount of money on food subsidies. There is an upper limit. 10% of the total production value. That's what you can spend. But developing countries tend to cross that limit. Again, let's look at India. New Delhi procures food grains from farmers at a fixed price. It's called the minimum support price, or the MSP. It's higher than the market price. The government then sells this grain to people who need it, some 800 million Indians. And the selling cost is much, much lower. So to recap, India buys grain at high rates, then sells them at much lower rates. Our population needs that kind of support. This also means that India has a public stock of food grains. It's become a point of contention now. Developing nations say the stock is unnecessary. After all, food security is national security, but Western countries disagree. They say public stocks often distort the prices. It can affect the market price of food. You can expect this battle to dominate the WTO talks. It also says a lot about India's role at the World Trade Organization. We are the 5th largest economy in the world. We are growing faster than most major economies. So the West is asking, why does India need so many subsidies? The answer, we say, lies in the economic divide. Yes, India's GDP is bigger than most Western nations, but look at the per capita income. Do you see the gap here? It means Indians need more state support. The government is working to reform that support, but eliminating it is not ideal. We saw that during the farm laws of 2020, the government of India tried to reform the agriculture market. The response was massive protests. So India is trying to change a few things, but the West needs to understand that change takes time. For many of us, the pandemic is a distant memory. New cases do not make us anxious. The world is not shutting down. The Wuhan virus is all but forgotten. But its impact on our body lingers on. If you're suffering from heart diseases, chances are it's linked to the Wuhan virus. If you're suffering from brain disorders, again, it could be the Wuhan virus. And then there are the vaccines. The world raced to get them out, but no one really looked at what the long-term effects could be. And those side effects are now surfacing. Our next report tells you why the Wuhan virus still continues to haunt us.
Three years, 700 million cases, 7 million deaths, countries under lockdown, economies in shambles. The COVID-19 pandemic left a big impact on the world. But it's still not over. The virus may not be deadly anymore, but it has triggered a wave of other diseases. So what kind of diseases are we looking at? The first is cardiovascular disease. The virus has left people vulnerable to heart-related illnesses. One study says COVID-19 increases the rate of heart attacks by 8%. It increases the rate of strokes by 2%. Since the pandemic struck, 250,000 more Americans over the age of 35 succumbed to heart diseases. Almost 700,000 Americans died from heart disease in 2020, the highest in any year since 2001. But the lines are blurry. Scientists don't know how many are directly related to COVID and how many are due to indirect complications from it. But it's not just the heart that was affected by COVID-19. The virus led to a slew of other conditions. There was lung damage. In India, 49% still report shortness of breath. 27% experience cough. This is months after they were infected. People who have had COVID-19 have a 43% increased risk for autoimmune diseases. COVID-19 can also lead to a slew of other problems, like hypertension, diabetes, lung fibrosis, asthma, erectile dysfunction, menstrual changes. The list goes on and on. COVID-19 can even lead to nervous system problems. And all of this doesn't show up immediately. It could take years for the symptoms to emerge. So COVID-19 and its effects linger on. But what about vaccines? During the pandemic, they were a lifesaver, a beacon of hope for the world. But it isn't all good. A new study has analyzed 99 million vaccinated people, and it links vaccines to a slew of brain, heart, and blood illnesses. Then there are autoimmune disorders like the Guillain-Barré syndrome. It's a rare autoimmune disorder. It's reported among those who took the AstraZeneca shots. So COVID-19 may not be as prevalent, and new cases may be rare. Countries may have opened up, but the effects linger on even after 4 years. And it's unlikely that they will disappear anytime soon.
Our next story is from Ethiopia. It is the largest country in the Horn of Africa region, and its government is regularly at war with the people. At present, there are two major conflicts taking place, one in the Amhara region and the other in Oromia. The Oromia conflict is long drawn, but the latest phase has been raging since 2018, months after Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed took charge. And another event occurred around the same time. A clandestine security committee was formed. Their existence was kept a secret. Their goal was to try and end the Oromia conflict, but they have reportedly become a Gestapo-like squad, ordering illegal detentions and extrajudicial killings. Here's our report.
Ethiopia is a multicultural country, home to people of multiple different ethnicities. The largest group are the Oromo. Native to the southern Oromia region of Ethiopia. The country's Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, is also a member of this group. But despite this, his government seems to have been targeting his brethren. After Abiy Ahmed took office in 2018, a secret committee was formed called the Kori Naginya, meaning Security Committee in the Oromo language. This committee was formed to tackle the Oromo conflict, an insurgency that has been raging since at least 1973. It has taken various shapes and forms over the years, but the latest phase began in August 2018, months after Abiy Ahmed came to power. It seems that to counter this, the Ethiopian government formed the Kori Naginya. Now, a security committee may not sound out of place, especially considering the tenuous situation in Oromia. But this committee was kept a secret. Its existence was just confirmed last week by an investigative report. This investigation has brought disturbing details to light. It seems this committee has gone into Gestapo territory, ordering arbitrary detentions, torture, extortion, and even extrajudicial killings. This is according to the head of Ethiopia's Human Rights Commission. He also said the committee overreached its purpose by interfering in the justice system with widespread human rights violations. These violations allegedly include the massacre of 14 tribal leaders in 2021, a massacre later blamed on Oromia rebels. The so-called Security Committee was apparently formed months after Abiy Ahmed took charge. It is allegedly headed by the PM's former chief of staff. It meets in the Oromia regional offices of his Prosperity Party. But so far, there is still no concrete proof that Abiy Ahmed is behind its illegal activities, even though some people have alleged that it was formed at his instigation. If we believe that he has nothing to do with it, then it means that there was a rogue government agency murdering people under his watch. Or we assume that Abiy Ahmed was involved, which means Ethiopia's Nobel Peace Prize winning PM has a murderous secret police force. Neither scenario is good for Abiy Ahmed, nor for Ethiopia. The country has been a hotbed for violence. The Oromia conflict is ongoing. There was the Tigray War that ended in 2022, and now there's a conflict in Ethiopia's Amhara region. Amhara is becoming another killing field. Last Monday, 15 civilians were reportedly killed in an airstrike. At least 45 others were killed last month, allegedly in door-to-door raids by federal security forces. Over 50 people were killed in December, and so on. This is in Amhara. We don't know yet if that region has its own so-called security committee too. If they do, there may be more atrocities waiting to be discovered.
Money can't buy friendship, but in China, it can certainly buy the appearance of friendship. And to some, appearance is everything, which is why the business of friendship is booming in China. That's right, business. We are talking about the market of paid companionship, where people can hire someone to be their friend. Well, what does one do with a hired friend? Objectively speaking, it's completely subjective. To rent a friend means no compromise on place, time, or interest. Anything goes, as long as the relationship remains strictly platonic. You simply pay for someone's presence, and they can accompany you on a picnic, go skydiving with you, or listen to your rants over a cup of coffee. How does one find such quote-unquote friends? There are designated websites and apps, but Chinese social media plays a big role here. It has become a popular platform to hire friends. It's kind of like looking for a flatmate on social media. You post an advertisement, list all relevant details, mention the price details, and voila. A fellow netizen will stumble upon the post. If they're interested, they contact you, maybe negotiate the price, and both parties finalize a deal. That's how it works. But speaking of prices, what is the going rate to rent a friend? Based on anecdotal evidence, it's anywhere between $15 to $25, and for the Chinese youth, it's good enough to become a side gig. Few people rent their friendship for fun. For most, it's a business opportunity. So China's youth are renting spare time for extra cash. And paid companionship has become a part of China's gig economy. And like any successful business, it's thanks to a blossoming friendship between supply and demand. The supply here is Chinese youth, with a lot of time on their hands and a need to earn extra money. And why is that? Well, look at China's slow economic recovery, its soaring layoffs, and high youth unemployment, which now stands at 14.5%. The result is this: Chinese youth are crumbling under pressure. Some 54 million people in China suffer from depression, 41 million suffer from anxiety, plus more than 92 million young people live alone in China. So loneliness is spreading across the nation. The youth of China needs new ways to decompress. They need friendship, which can be hard to find. Hence the growing demand for hired friends. But this doesn't apply just to China. Renting relationships is a growing trend the world over. Japan has a similar service, to rent a friend. Also, if you don't want to attend an event alone, you can pay an actor to impersonate your relative or spouse or co-worker. In the US and the UK too, you can rent a friend, plus pay extra to hug them. To those who support this trend, paid companionship is a boon. It sits between seeking professional therapy and getting no help at all. But to others, it is bizarre. In the digital age, people use the internet for everything, from buying groceries to finding love. Now they're using it to find friendship as well. But here's the thing. Finding a friend is easy. Cultivating a friendship, on the other hand, requires time and effort, not to mention emotional investment. It may be difficult, but research shows it is worth it. Enduring friendships help us cope better. They are the bulwark against poor mental health. Hired friends, on the other hand, do none of this. They may show us a good time, but they won't provide a shoulder to cry on or give advice, maybe not even a word of truth. And they will certainly not be there if they aren't being paid to be there. So hiring a friend is like popping a pill. It may treat some symptoms, but it won't take care of the illness. And when it comes to building real connections, the greater the effort, the sweeter the reward. In 2023, India landed on the moon and aimed for the sun. This year, India is planning for another space milestone. Its first manned space mission, Gaganyaan. The launch will happen in 2025. The mission will carry 3 people to a low Earth orbit. They will stay there for 3 days. Today, the Prime Minister revealed the names of these astronauts, the ones who will be part of the mission. And if the mission succeeds, India will achieve new space glory. It will become only the 4th country in the world to send humans into space. Our next report tells you how India is pushing boundaries in space.
The year was 1984. It was a freezing evening in Soviet Kazakhstan. But Rakesh Sharma was in a pearly white spacesuit. He was inside the Soyuz T-11 spacecraft, gearing for takeoff at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Over 2,000 kilometers away, people in India were glued to their TV screens. After all, he was the first Indian heading to space. Rakesh Sharma's flight was historic, but it was on board a Russian spacecraft. 40 years later, India wants to send more Indians to space. This time on an Indian spacecraft. It's called the Gaganyaan mission. In Sanskrit, it means the celestial vehicle. The Gaganyaan is slated for launch in 2025. It will carry a 3-member crew to a low Earth orbit, around the distance of 400 kilometers. They will be there for 3 days. They will then be brought back to Earth, landing in Indian seawaters. The total cost of the mission is 900 crore rupees. That's around $1 billion. Today, Prime Minister Modi was in the state of Kerala. He visited the Vikram Sarabhai Space Centre. There he named the astronauts chosen for the mission. They are Group Captain Prashant Balakrishnan Nair, Group Captain Ajit Krishnan, Group Captain Angad Pratap, and Wing Commander Subhanshu Shukla.
ये सिर्फ 4 नाम और 4 इंसान नहीं है, ये 140 करोड़ एस्पिरेशंस को स्पेस में ले जाने वाली 4 शक्तियां हैं। 40 वर्ष के बाद कोई भारतीय अंतरिक्ष में जाने वाला है, लेकिन इस बार टाइम भी हमारा है, काउंटडाउन भी हमारा है और रॉकेट भी हमारा है।
These 4 men were selected from a pool of Air Force pilots. They have undergone extensive tests, both physical and psychological. They first received training in Russia. This was for a period of 13 months. Now they are being trained in Bengaluru. Gaganyaan could be a game changer for India's space sector. If successful, India could be the 4th country in the world to send humans to space, after the US, Soviet Union and China.
मुझे जानकर बहुत अच्छा लगा कि गगनयान में यूज होने वाले ज्यादातर उपकरण मेड इन इंडिया है। ये कितना बड़ा संयोग है कि जब भारत दुनिया की टॉप 3 इकोनॉमी बनने के लिए उड़ान भर रहा है, उसी समय भारत का गगनयान भी हमारे स्पेस सेक्टर को एक नई बुलंदी पर ले जाने वाला है।
Last year, India made history. It became the first country to land near the moon's south pole. Just weeks later, India also launched Aditya L1. This was its first observation mission to the sun. India has more ambitious plans in the wings. There's the Gaganyaan mission that's slated for 2025, but that's not all. India aims to set up its own space station by 2035. It also wants to send an astronaut to the moon by 2040. But the success of all of that hinges on the Gaganyaan mission. It's one takeoff that India will watch with bated breath.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Bolivia, a massive landslide engulfs a village, destroying homes, farms and crops. In Madrid, protesting farmers drove tractors through the city, ringing cowbells and beating drums. And could flying cars soon become a reality? One company thinks so, and it is showcasing its prototype in Barcelona. Finally, taking you back in history, on this day in 1933, the German parliament building was burned down. The Nazi leadership blamed the communists for this. Hitler used this incident to seize power, paving the way for a Nazi dictatorship in Germany. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Se ven las casas caídas, el agua ha salido por el garaje. Observando cómo están trabajando las personas. Apenas casi nos llaman por el poste.
Más famosa, y pues unas 30 que están con riesgo de caída, pues tienen una excavación en la parte de abajo.